So you just, and it's done. Alright guys, so we're ready to install the system into your truck. And we laid out on the table what you're going to need for the first step to actually get it put in. So what we have here is we have the loaded amplifier rack with some wiring coming off of it. We also have over here the tweeters with the connectors already done. We won't need the actual door speakers yet. That's actually the next video. But for this video, we are going to be installing the actual tweeters themselves. And if you chose to do a three-way kit, you'll notice that there's some additional wiring to actually run to your new custom A-pillars. But on all the two-way kits, it has the factory connector, so we actually won't even be running these. Here, we have the power kit, which is power and ground. It's already sleeved, already has a fuse holder in it. Pretty simple. We have some accessory bags like the glands and tie wraps to actually install the power kit. We have another bag that's the amplifier mounting kit, which are the feet and also the bolts that will end up mounting at the bottom of the amplifier rack. And then, since this is a Sony truck, we have the interface that allows you to retain the factory radio and give us the output that we're looking for. And then over here we have the tools that's going to be needed to do this installation. And Nathan over here will go through them.
Yeah, so basically you'll need a impact with a 7mm socket, a drill with a 1 1/8 hole saw. You'll also need a small unibit for the base knob that we're going to drill into the dash. A larger 3/8 impact is handy just to get some of the amplifier, factory amplifier rack. Getting all that uninstalled is very handy to have this impact. You'll need a 12mm, a 13mm, and a deep 10mm socket. If you don't have a deep 10mm socket, you could also use an open-ended wrench. That could also work. You'll also want an extension. That will definitely help. You have your panel tool that comes with the kit, and the flush cutters that come with the kit. Some Allen keys will also be handy whenever you're installing the power and the ground into the amp rack. And then just a Phillips screwdriver for installing the tweeters. And also a blanket of some sort, a towel, something that you can lay over this amp rack, because you're actually going to be flipping it over and working on the back side.
Yep. So that's everything we need. So we're going to go ahead and the first step is we're going to disconnect the ground of the truck. And then we're going to remove the factory subwoofer and factory amplifier system, and we're going to walk you through on how to do that. So that way we can install our Sony amplifier onto the board and get it ready for your new amplifier setup to go in the truck. So let's go.
Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and disconnect the battery. Just need a 10mm, and we're just going to disconnect the negative terminal on the battery. So I'm going to unlatch the hood. We're just going to disconnect this right here. Just have to loosen it. You don't want to lose that bolt, so just set that to the side. Awesome. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and get the factory amplifier and sub out of the truck, and you have to pull this down. It's pretty simple. You just need to lift this up so that way you can reach back here, and there's just a little like metal tab that you have to pull on. It's actually this piece right here. You just pull up on that and it releases the seat from right here. So we have a few bolts that hold this in. We have 2 7s up here in the top, a 13mm here. a 13 here and a 13 on the other side. That'll pull the sub enclosure out, and then there's a couple 10s on the bottom that I'll show you how to get those out. Alright, so got my 13, and I like to use an extension. Just makes it a lot easier to reach the bolts. One there. There's a nut there. Need a deep 13. You actually need a deep 13 to be able to get this nut off, because that bolt is so long. So then you can disconnect this green plug right here and lift this and pull it out of the truck. Now you can see there's these studs here, but they also have a hex head on them. So you can take a 10 millimeter, a deep 10, and fit it on there. And it pulls out just like that. Then you have another 10 millimeter right here. And the 2 7s at the top. You can see over here there's a plastic panel that is covering this wiring. You can just pull on that pretty well, or you can use the metal panel tool provided in the kit. And then you can just disconnect all 3 of these plugs. There's also some clips that are holding the factory wiring. The panel tool makes it much easier. And that's the factory amplifier. And we're actually going to remove these 4 Phillips head screws off of this bracket, and this is actually going to attach to the back of the aftermarket amplifier rack. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and remove these 4 Phillips. Oh boy. Kind of tough. And you're going to want to take these plastic retainers off. You won't need those anymore, but you can hang on to them if you ever put the system back to factory. So, next thing is, you want to be careful with the amplifier rack. So, just going to lay this out. Move this over to the side. And whenever you're handling the amp rack, you can see there are some buttons on here. Just make sure you don't press any of those. If you do, just make sure they're in the correct spot. If you don't know, just give us a call. We're happy to help out in any way. So just be mindful of those. So you just want to take the board, flip it upside down, and in the hardware kit there are 4 Phillips head screws. And these are actually going to mount the factory amplifier on this board. The reason we're mounting this amplifier to the board is because with the Amp Pro piece, the amplifier has to be retained in the vehicle, just so that it communicates with the factory radio. So now we can flip the board back over, and we're just going to have to, there's 4 Phillips head screws right here. Let me actually flip it this way. And that is where our brackets are going to be attached to. So, just want to take these out. And the side that has the beveled edges is actually going to go on the outside. So that way it countersinks the screw into the board. Do the same thing on this side. Now we want to go ahead and remove all of the zip ties for the wires that have to be ran. So you can just cut these. Make sure to not cut any of the other zip ties on the board, because these are actually holding the wires to the board and you don't want to loosen those up in any way. You have your bass knob cable, which we can go ahead and disconnect that and set it to the side. Remote wire and RCAs. So the first thing we want to do is actually get the bracket off of the vehicle.
Hold on.
You need to get this bracket off that actually holds the seat on. Our amplifier rack is actually going to mount to this screw. You need to keep this screw because we will use this to mount the amplifier rack. And there is a retaining clip on these brackets that holds the nut on, or the screw on. So sometimes you can take a flathead, get it under there, and once you get it under there enough, you can probably take a pair of pliers and pry it off. You won't need this retaining clip, so if it breaks, that's not a bad thing. So I'm going to take my panel tool and see if I can get under here. Just kind of want to work with it.
Might need some pliers.
Might need some pliers. So I'm gonna get a pair of pliers real quick. Alright, so usually you can just kind of close it in on itself. And there it goes. So it's probably one of the most frustrating parts of this job, but it's definitely necessary. So this actually will hook into that and slide down just a tad. So we can just leave that loose for now, and we are ready to install the amplifier rack. Alright, so before we get the amp rack in here, we want to get this C pillar uninstalled. You have an A pillar, a B pillar, and a C pillar. So the first thing we have to remove is this side panel. Pretty simple to remove. You can always use a panel tool if you're having trouble with it. You actually need to remove this seat belt from this right here. So in certain trucks, I believe the ones, the non-Raptor trucks, there's actually just a bolt right here, but if it has the inflatable seat belt, then it's actually going to be right here. So we can take our panel tool. There's a little notch right there. You can just pop it up. You'll need a 12 millimeter. Take a 12 millimeter. And that will just come off just like that. And I would just go ahead and put that back in, just so that way you don't lose it and you don't have a seatbelt anymore. Next thing we can do is take this weather stripping out. Be careful because these edges are sharp most of the time, so just don't rub your arm up against it because it may slice your arm open. And then you're gonna take this panel, you're gonna come up at the top and just pull out and continue downward. But before we can get the panel removed, there's actually a safety clip that is there in case the airbag goes off. It keeps the panel in place without moving any further than this, so that way it doesn't hit you in the head. So if I push it up, I can see that it's like a T at the top, and then it's got some teeth going the opposite direction. So I can angle that the way it needs to go. And there's a slot right here at the bottom that it fits right up in and out of. Then you just need to unclip it from right here. And pull it on out without damaging the headliner. And pull the seatbelt through. And set it to the side. I'm going to go ahead and put this weather stripping back on, just that way I don't cut myself. Have to go to the hospital. This seatbelt can kind of get in the way. You can just basically set it up there, get it out of your way. So now we are ready for the amplifier rack, and it will just go right in here, and I will show you where to mount everything. Okay, so we're ready for the amplifier rack to go into the vehicle. I've got all of my wires bundled right here, including the sub wire and the mounting hardware as well. I'm going to give to Don. So just go ahead and pick it up. You can kind of just set it in here like this. Then you just want to kind of drop your wires down, get those out of your way. So it's just going to drop into place like this. And the first thing we need to get lined up is the seat belt, the seat bracket. So we've got our factory screw right here. We're just going to thread that in there. may take a minute to get it lined up, but just be patient with it. There we go. So with this hardware, you have 2 spacers and 2 bolts. These are 12mm bolts, and these spacers are going to sit right under here, just like that. You can line up with the factory hole, which looks like that, but it's right over here. Can I get some light? There we go. So you just want to try to get those started at first. Then you've also got one right here, which if you push that back you can see it. So you just want to get that spacer up under there. Once you've got all the bolts threaded in, you can start tightening everything down. So I'm going to start with this 10mm right here. Alright, so then you can grab your 12mm and go ahead and tighten these 2 bottom bolts down. So that's it. That's the amplifier rack is in place and mounted down. And you have your factory plugs right here for your amplifier. Now these will actually plug into the factory amplifier still, except for this one gray plug right here will plug into the pigtail that we have coming off of the amplifier rack. So just the blue plug and this odd looking gray plug will go back into the factory amplifier. Just like that. And now you have a subwire, which is actually going to go this direction, and I'll just lay that right there for now. We can discuss that later. Alright. Okay, so what we have here is the wires that need to go to the front. The RCA's, the remote, that's both going behind the radio, and the bass knob is going into the dash left of the steering column. So as you can see, there's this wire that's coming up to the seat. We're just going to go ahead and run that underneath the wires there.
Could you imagine if we didn't bundle that right now?
So then you have all of these wires. You have the factory amplifier plug that's plugged into the amplifier rack. Then you have the factory sub wire. That's all going to be tucked back into here. We're actually going to zip tie it back in here. So get the bundle of zip ties. And we're going to bundle this sub wire up. And zip tie our wires to this factory wiring right here. And then flush cut it. So these are going to the front of the vehicle. Before we get these ran, we're going to have to pull this B-pillar off. And the seat is actually in the way. So what I'm going to do is connect the battery back just for a minute. We don't have anything disconnected or anything, so shouldn't be harmful to connect the battery back. You want to take this panel out. And there is this right here. So you kind of have to pry on a little bit. Just like a seatbelt cover. And then this piece right here. I can usually get my hand under. There we go. It just hooks in at the top and there's two clips at the bottom. So then you can take this right here and just pull it on out. And there's clips on the bottom as well. Grab this one. And if you can see right in here, there's one more clip right there. It's kind of difficult to get out, but if you just press right there where it is, it just comes right on out. And then you can line that seatbelt out of there. Pull it on out. Okay. Now we can channel these wires on up to the front. And you really just want to get these wires underneath this right here. Just push down between the carpet and that piece right there. And then you can just put zip ties, tying it to the factory wiring here. We're going to continue running that on up. In this piece right here, you have to pull this weather stripping out. First thing you're going to do is pull the clip from the bottom, and then it's just going to pull this way. And you have to go around the hood latch. So we can just run this on up. Gonna lay that in the floor for right now. It's wet right there.
Yep.
We're gonna get some zip ties in here. Don't forget to flush cut the zip ties. And this is where, if you have the three-way active system, you're going to have to run wires up to this pillar here. So basically, you would just get your panel tool, pry on this piece right here. And pretty much right now, we're going to pull this down. That can just pull straight down. Very simple. And right now we're going to go ahead and run all of these wires on up. Make sure when you're running this wire, the base knob wire, just be careful with this clip here. You can sometimes just take a piece of tape and cover it, just so that way you know that you're not going to damage it. Sometimes when you're pulling this way, it can actually just break it off. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to put that up for right now. And then down here, I'm going to zip tie my wires to this cable right here.
Hey, Nathan.
Hey. Then you can just push those to the side. So the base knob is actually going to go right here in the dash. I will show you how to get that removed and how to drill the hole later on. But for now, we need to get these wires ran to as close to the back of the radio as we possibly can get right now without taking the radio out. And also, if you did have the three-way active system, this is where you would start diverging the wire for the mid-range. Basically, you would just go straight up here if this customer has a an alarm system in here. So basically, you would just go straight up here and come out right here. And you can zip tie to the factory wiring in there. So at this point, we need to go ahead and pull the factory radio out so we can get those ran up behind the radio. Okay, so to get the factory radio out, there's a panel right here that actually covers the factory center channel. Tells us it's Sony. Basically, you just want to get your panel tool up under there without scratching anything. And it's going to sound like it's breaking, but it's not. And there's a clip in each corner. So that's it. You can set that to the side. Now we don't have to touch the center channel, but there are two 7mm screws right there behind the radio. I mean, not the radio, the center channel. And it's best to just use a ratchet, because most drills won't be able to fit back here with the windshield. just the two 7mm bolts. And sometimes these clips can be pretty tough, but this one was actually pretty easy. So you can always use the panel tool for that. Then you have the connector for the center channel. Just disconnect it like that. Set it to the side. Then you can take a drill, put your 7mm on it. And the two screws on the top. From here, it's definitely going to sound like you're breaking something, but you're not. You just want to grab up here at the top and just pull. All the way around until it's free. Then you have some not so much fun braid clips. Once I get these out, I can show you how they clip in. Basically, you have a clip there on the side, and you just have to push those in. And if they're not coming out, a little trick is to push the clip in, release the clip, and then pull it on out. Then you have these, which is a clip on the bottom. Then you have that one, which also has a clip on the bottom. And that's that for the radio trim. Then you have to take the screen and the actual head unit for the radio out of the vehicle. Saved one of them. Nope. So here you have 3 clips. One is right here, just a standard clip like that. Then here you can see the clip is right there. These can be kind of tricky. Just like that. This one's the funny one. It's got a gray clip that actually slides over, and you need to push in this clip right here and it'll slide over. You can just tuck these wires back in the dash so they're out of your way. And this is going to be kind of tough to pull out. It's going to feel like it's being held in by something else, but it's not. And you have 4 plugs on the back of this. That just has a standard clip. Also the same. And then you have 2 more clips that were kind of like this blue one. So now we have plenty of room to get the factory wiring, not the factory wiring, the aftermarket wiring up here behind the dash, which is actually where the AP4 is going to go. So I like to pull this panel down. It gives us a little bit of clearance. And remember, this base knob is not going behind the radio, it's going right here. So all you have to run are the RCAs and the remote wire. It's usually best to run your wires over the factory wiring, so that way you know that they're not going to fall down. I like to get it to right here. Keeping in mind to not pull too hard, because you may damage the RCAs. Just try and feed all the wires through there. There we go. And this will come right behind the radio. Right here. So there you have it. You have all your wires behind the radio, ready for the AP4. Okay, so in this section of the video, we're going to install the bass knob in the dash. What you'll need is a drill, a unibit. We'll need a hole saw to make a hole behind the dash so the bass knob can actually sit in the dash. A 10mm socket, a 7mm socket, and the panel tool. So let's get started. First thing you're going to need is 7mm and panel tool. You're going to drop this panel down and just let it dangle. There's going to be a 7 on either side, or these bronze colored 7s. Set those aside. And then you can just pull on this piece right here. You can probably tell. I'm going to go ahead and drop the steering column. There's this little leather piece that's attached to the steering column. You can just pull up on that and it should come off of the steering column. So now we're going to take this back over here. And this is where the bass knob is going to go, right in this area. So we just want to make sure you can kind of eyeball it to where the center is going to be. It should be about right there. You can take your unibit, get it in the center. Let's see if that's big enough. That should be good. Basically, you just want to make a hole that's slightly larger than the threads on this right here. And usually you can, so there's still some plastic there. You can just take your unibit, kind of do that, and I'll clean that off. And you just want to poke that through. Well, actually you want to keep one of these washers on one side, so that way it keeps it in place. Take the other one on top of there. That is a 10 millimeter, so you can take your 10 millimeter socket, which you have to use the right side. And then just turn it all the way to the left or the right. Just make sure that the arrow is in the right direction. Make sure that it's even, and push it all the way on.
Yes.
Okay. Now, next thing we need to do is go ahead and get our hole saw. Same one that we're going to be using for the power kit. And tighten that on. Take it over here. And as you can probably see, you have this that the base knob would not be able to, the panel wouldn't be able to go on because of the base knob. We added some distance there, so we're gonna have to cut a hole right there so that way the base knob can fit. Alright, so we're gonna move the steering out of the way. And we're just gonna center this hole saw right up on that panel. Clean it up a little bit. And you also want to go ahead and get your base knob wire over here and up through the hole just a little bit. We're going to be zip tying this down, and once we get the cluster panel back on. And the two bronze screws go on either side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this slack back through here and put a zip tie right here on these factory wires. Alright, so in this section we're going to disassemble the A-pillars, so that way for the two-way kits you can install the tweeters into your factory pillars, and if you have the three-way kit, that's where you will take the pillars that we have made, and that's where you'll put them into the dash. So what you'll need is Phillips. You'll need that later. Basically right now you'll need a 10 millimeter and the panel tool that's provided in the kit. So alright, so you can see there's a panel here and a panel here. These you can usually get them with your fingers, but there's actually clips on both sides of this panel, although this one does not remove. You can just kind of turn it around so that way you can get to that bolt, but you don't need to remove it. Now be careful with these do like to break sometimes. So not the panel itself, but actually the clip from the panel. So just be careful when you're trying to spin them around. Then you take a 10mm. There are one on either side. And just gonna pull down and up out of the dash. Here you can see that there's a clip on the factory tweeter, and that's it. And you can repeat the same thing on the other side. The driver's side is identical. So I definitely recommend using a screwdriver instead of a drill getting these Phillips screws out. The reason for that being is that the plastic does like to strip out. So with a screwdriver you don't really have to worry about that. So 2 screws, one on either side. You can just go ahead and remove that. And this tweeter will sit right in place. Don't over tighten them because these screws are the exact length they need to be. If you go any tighter than they need to be, they will actually poke through the plastic here. So just be mindful of that. So now this pillar has the tweeter installed and is ready to go back in the vehicle. So here you can see that we have the factory style plug, and plugs right in. Slides in at the bottom there, and there are some tabs up here you have to line up, and it clips right in. Take your 2 10mm bolts, one at the top, one at the bottom, flip your panels around, and that's it. Alright, so now that we've got the radio out of the vehicle and we have all the wires that need to be ran to the back of the radio behind the radio, now we need the AP4 FD21. So we can go ahead and open this up. You have a module and a harness. Now this module has some Velcro on it. That's how we're going to mount it. Then you can see here you have sub, rear, and front. We're only going to be using the front and the rear. So, and then you have your factory wires, factory wiring here. This is just a T-harness. This plugs into the like the head unit that's on the lower portion that has the CD player built in, and then this is going into the touch screen above the radio. And this plug here is just going to plug in right here. And this right here is your remote. This is just a barrel connector, and on the other side of our remote wire, it's just going to plug right in. So this should be very simple. So we can go ahead and take this into the vehicle. Now the first thing we're going to do is take our RCAs and our remote wire, and we're going to run them behind this metal bracket right here. And then behind this harness. So then you want to take these wires and you can just route them behind this harness right here. And set them to the side. Next thing we need to do is go ahead and hook up the RCAs and the remote wire to the AP4. So as I stated earlier, there's a front and a rear RCA. So go ahead and take your front. You see the front on the module. You can plug it in left and right. Left and right. And now we have the remote wire. And that simply just plugs right in. Now we need to take this adhesive off. Which can be the challenging part. And this is just going to stick right on to that module right there. And then we need to zip tie these wires in a small little bundle right here. We can actually attach them to these factory wires right here. And tuck them on back. So the next thing we need to do is actually connect the T-harness wiring. This one is going to this plug here. So we can connect that. And I'll go ahead and undo that clip so it's easier when we're putting the screen back in. And then this one goes down to the lower portion. Now this one we're going to have to run behind this bracket, so that way the radio doesn't hit it. Let's get this wiring out of our way. So now this plugs into the bigger plug that plugs into the radio. Remember, you still have this one. And now that can be zip tied up in the dash, so that way it's out of your way. So now that you have everything connected down here, we're going to go ahead and install the factory radio back into the dash. So you have your two antenna connections. And then the two wiring harnesses. And remember, it's all the silver screws or the gray screws that go into the radio units. Now that we've got the head unit in place, now we can kind of situate these wires a little bit better. So this we can zip tie. And put it back into the dash. So now you have these plugs that plug into the radio trim, this USB looking plug, an antenna, and the power plug for the screen. So we can go ahead and grab that. Latch it on like that. Goes in there. And we can take our radio trim, plug those two in, and don't forget about these. Just clips in like that. Then you have your two 7s on the top. So now you have your center channel harness. I'm going to go ahead and zip tie that up so that way we don't have any rattles up in the dash. And in this panel, you have your clips in the front, and then the two 7s in the back. The last thing you need to do with the radio is put the center channel grill on. Alright, so we're about to get started on the power wire kit. This is power and ground. These trucks do not have a sufficient ground on the chassis of the truck, so we like to run power and ground just so that way the amplifiers get the amount of power that they actually need. Tools that you'll need are an impact of some sort with an 11 and a 12, and also a 10. There's different nuts on different batteries for these Ford trucks. I like to change it up every year to year. You need a 1 1/8 hole saw, so that way we can go through the the floor of the truck where we're actually going to be running the wires into the truck. Some kind of aught gauge cutters that you can cut the wire with. You can also use some cutters like this. We prefer to use a cutter like this though. You'll need a panel tool, a 7mm.
For what?
I don't know. Why is this over here?
I didn't know. I just put everything there.
Man, you're tripping
You're
me
the
up.
tool department.
You're tripping me up, man. That will be handy. And the flush cutters for the zip ties. And in the kit comes with these right here, which will actually be the grommet, you could say, and that will fasten onto the chassis of the truck, and we will put our wire through there, and this will actually tighten it down. So that'll be nice, and it's water sealed. You don't have to worry about it leaking or anything like that. You will need some Allen keys to be able to hook the power wire up to the amplifier rack. And that should be it. First step is connecting the battery back. We do recommend, if you have automatic side steps, that you, whenever you disconnect the battery, that they're up whenever you're working on the vehicle. It'll just make things a lot easier when you're actually under the vehicle. So what we're going to do is go ahead and connect the battery and disconnect it. That simple. Next step is we need to get this side panel off, this C-pillar, and this side panel here. So, same as we did on the other side. Let's pull this panel up and pull this weather stripping. You can go ahead and unclip this here. Here we have the seat belt again. Need to pull on this, which I'll need the panel tool, and a 12mm socket. That'll just pull off. Make sure to go ahead and put that back in so you don't lose it. Next step is pulling this down. Well, actually, we need to get this seat out of our way. So, thankfully this side just has a tab right there. So, now we can pull this on out of our way. And this side is just like the other side. Go ahead and pull your seatbelt through. Pull this out of the way. You can go ahead and put this weather stripping back on so that way you don't cut yourself. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and run the power wire through. The power wire is actually going to come up through the floor right here. Just the simplest thing we see you to do. It's very hard to fit 2 0-gauge power wires through these channels here, so we find it easiest to just run it underneath the truck. So first step is going to be cutting the zip ties on the kit. And so you have your ground and your power. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the power. So this is going to line up just like this in the vehicle. We're actually going to screw the fuse holder down right here and route the wire up here and connect it onto this terminal here. That is an 11mm socket, and over here that should be a 12mm socket. Also in this bag we have 2 plastic screws. Well, they're not plastic, but they're for plastic. So these are what's going to mount the fuse holder onto the truck. So you can see there's a tab here and a tab here. I'm just going to push that down. And using a bit that is magnetized definitely helps. And do not go ahead and connect this because we don't really want to be running this power wire when it's live. So we can go ahead and connect the ground here, but then again, just don't connect it here. Like, don't connect the ground terminal back to the battery. Okay, so this is actually a 13mm. So I'm gonna get that disconnected and take your ground wire and connect it there. And he has an aftermarket ground, the customer does, on here. I'm actually going to put that on the top side if it'll come off. There we go. Going to put that on the top side here. Now I'm going to take my ground. We're actually going to route it just straight down. That should just go straight down to the ground. And you can take your power wire and go the same direction. Sometimes you can get under the truck and get it straightened out. So there we go. So all of this will go together. What I'm going to do is just put a zip tie right there, so that way everything is nice and neat up here. So that way when we're ready to connect the power, everything is nice and uniform. So now it's time to get under the truck and start running the wires back. Okay, so we've got our wires down under the truck, and we have this where the chassis actually meets up here, and we're just gonna run it on the other side of this right here. So we're gonna go ahead and pull that all the way through and over this way.
I don't know what angles I'm getting. Alright, once you get that situated, we're gonna switch sides.
Yeah. Okay.
Alright, so they come down like that, and then here it's split though. We gotta fix that. Alright, so the wires come down, and it's hard to get a shot, but it goes on top of this frame mounting point, and then it continues this way. And one thing to always check for, whoever installed these, what do you call these? Step bars, they push out this customer's grommet right there. So obviously it's leaking water. So that's something that he'll need to get addressed, but just something to look out for while you're under here. So what Nathan's zip tying to is actually factory wiring, right?
No, this is aftermarket.
All right, so what if they don't have aftermarket wiring?
Then there is some factory here.
Where's the factory mounting points? So there's some factory wiring already under here, and you can zip tie along the way to this factory wiring. Of course, the reason we put the step bar up was just to ensure that this motorization piece didn't interfere with any of the wiring or anything like that. Also, it happens to give you a little bit more room while you're under here running the wires. So we'll just go down the path and zip tie it securely to factory wiring or factory mounting points. If you do decide to zip tie to aftermarket wiring, just double check, make sure they did a good job. Of course, factory is going to do a great job, but you know, just pay attention as you go down and zip tying this.
Then here you can do the same thing at the front.
Yep, and here you'll see another factory mounting point for the body to the chassis, and you'll want to go up and over that point. And again, this wire is it's in a sleeving that we put on the wire, so it's protected from the elements and gives you additional protection, so no worries there. So we continue on. You can see the point there above that mounting point.
And from here, this is where we will be going through in the floor. So that will be the next step, is actually drilling the holes from the top side and getting those grommets in place. Okay, so next you'll need your drill and the 1 1/8 hole saw. and the 2 grommets. So take these on over. And you want to make sure that you don't drill too high, because if so, then the carpet's not going to go down and the panel won't go on. So you kind of want to go right at this angle where you can kind of see the curvature of the truck. So you want to go right there and kind of go as far right as you possibly can, where you can still have that grommet in place. That's that. You want to make sure that you put this side in down there instead of this side, because if you try and run the Tech Flex in here, it's just going to get caught in it, and that's not very fun. So you can push that in right there, and then on the other side you can thread that on. You want to make sure that it's pretty tight, just so that way it gets a good seal. Then the next one you don't want to do right next to it, and you want to do maybe about a 1/2 inch over. Before we get that in there, I'm going to go ahead and get like a
Grab vacuum, clean it up.
So yeah, basically the body of the truck will be right here in between this and this nut right here. If I can, there we go. And then this nut right here is actually going to clamp the wire in this grommet. So with this rubber piece around the wire and this nut on here, it actually squeezes these little clamps together. And then you'll hear it click until you can't go anymore, and it will be watertight sealed. So we're gonna go ahead, put that one in, tighten it down. Then you can take these out. Go ahead and take the rubber piece out as well, because you can just slide those over the wire, make it a lot easier. So now, sorry.
There's a door there.
Oh my goodness.
You alright?
Ouch. Okay. this rubber piece will just slide on, and so will that. Push these down, pull the wire tight, make sure that rubber piece sits in between the wire and those clamps like that. And then you can go ahead and spin the nut on there. And that should be good. Do the same thing for the ground. Pull it tight. So now I can't even pull the wire or push it in any direction. So that's how you know it's got a good seal. At this point, you want to run the wire that would be fine for that. You want to go ahead and remove the jack, just so it makes it easier to run the wires. Okay, so we can pull the jack out of the way. And you can just set the wires up right now. Power up as well. If you can come over here, I'm actually going to fold the wires into the panel as much as possible, and I'm going to zip tie them to this factory wiring right here. I think my zip ties are right here. Get a few of those. Do the same thing up here. Make sure to cut the zip ties. And then you can just route the wires behind this panel here. Push the panel back. Now we're ready to go ahead and put the C pillar and this whole side back together. First thing you want to do is get the seat belt through the hole. And then you need to get these clips lined up, which are not the most fun thing in the world. But you can see that there's a tab and a clip. Just need to get that down far enough. There we go. That clips in. before you get it all clipped back together, you need to make sure that you get this tab put back in, that safety clip. Push it back on. And that goes in there just like that. And the weather stripping just slides right back on.
Floor piece.
And the side panel. Okay. So now we have our power wire right there where the distribution blocks are. So we can go ahead and cut those to length and connect those. Alright, so I'm going to do my ground first, which is just the black sleeve. And I'm just going to leave enough slack to where it's like that. Actually, I'm going to run it behind, see how much I need, to where it's like that. So that's where I need to cut. And you don't want to strip too much back, maybe just half an inch or 3/4 of an inch. And you need to go ahead and take this screw all the way out. Make sure you do not lose it. Set it to the side, because you've got to get this little piece out of here. Alright. Thread that back in there just a tad bit. Okay, so we've got the ground stripped back, and we just have this sleeve right here. We're going to use the heat shrink that's included in the kit and just slip it over here around the sleeve. It's a lot easier if you actually put this on there before you cut the power wire or the ground wire, but you just run it up like that, and you can take a lighter, torch, heat gun, anything that you have, and just heat it up. Go all the way around until it's tight on the wire. Make sure your wire is twisted nice and tight. Take your Allen key. Tighten it all the way down. Then we can put this cover back on. Now keep in mind that the power wire needs to go to the distribution block that says power. If for whatever reason these caps ever get swapped, the one that has the fuses in line is the one that's for the power. If that is hooked up backwards, it will fry the entire system, so you have to keep that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and put my heat shrink on there, make it easier. And get my length. Must be about right there. And strip back about 3/4 of an inch. Then take your heat shrink up and heat it with a lighter, torch, heat gun, anything that you have. Now we can tuck these wires back behind the panel. And we can use a zip tie to make sure they're not going anywhere. Make sure to put the distribution block cover back on. And now that we're back here, I want to go ahead and run the sub wire. This is simply just coming straight down through here. And if we lift this seat up, you can see that it's right here. We just want to route it right through here, just like that. So now that's ready for the box to be plugged in. One thing before we get it all back together is the jack. The jack will go back in place. And the thumb piece. And that's it. Alright, so we've got the power wire ran and it's connected to the amp rack. Just make sure whenever you've got all the wires ran, just go under the truck again and double check, make sure the wires are nice and tight. Zip tie anywhere that you see that it needs to be zip tied. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and connect it at the battery. So we want to connect the power and the factory ground back to the battery terminal. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and connect the factory ground.
And before you do that, make sure no one's laying underneath if you have the motorized steps.
Yes.
As soon as you connect ground, they might open if your door is open.
Correct. So we're going to go ahead and connect this. And that is a 10 millimeter. Okay, so now we've got the factory ground terminal connected. We're just going to tuck this power wire down into this channel. And we're going to be connecting here. Go ahead, take a blade, just cut a nice straight line down, 2 of them. And then just straight across. That will leave enough room for that. That's what that is. That will leave enough room for that power wire to sit down on there. And also, if you have any other accessories like this customer has, go ahead and put those on top of our power kit.
And it might spark, and that's okay. It'll wake you up.
You don't actually feel the spark, it just sparks. Now that sits on there. Nice.
Good.
So you can put a few more zip ties up here as you feel necessary. Put one here, another one here. That's what we're gonna do. So just as you feel, just go ahead and zip tie it on up. You can never have too many zip ties, so.
Never.
So now we're gonna get started on the reassembly of the vehicle. I know on this side of the truck, we have all of the panels on. We just need to connect the seat belt back. So we have the bolt right here. And just going to connect it like this. And don't forget the tab piece. So that goes on there like that. That seat belt's done. Now we can go on to the other side. We have a little bit more to put back together over here. So we have the C pillar that needs to be put back on this side panel, the B pillar, that side panel, the kick panel, and the panel that goes on the side of the dash right there. Okay, so we're going to start with the C pillar right here. Just want to get that set in there. Make sure to pull the weather stripping off all the way up and down. And remember, you have your wires right here. Just make sure those are behind the panel. You have the seat belt up here. Needs to be fished through. And got to there we go.
And the little clippy thing at the top.
Yeah. So once you get this pin down here lined up and that one clip in, then I would start going up here and putting that little airbag safety clip back in. And don't try and just slam the panel back in there. Make sure all the clips line up first, so that way you don't damage any clips. And then it has to be clipped in down here as well. And this weather stripping can go back on. So the next thing we're going to do is put this B-pillar back in. Since those side panels actually sit on top of the pillars. So the pillar goes in between these two seat belts, and this cable has to go in that slot right there. And it's usually best to pull the weather stripping off. So then, just like you did with the C-pillar, make sure everything lines up first before you try to push anything on. And then you have this right here. The top hooks in, and then the bottom clips on. And this just clips in. Then the weather stripping can go back on. Then you have your side panel right here. And before we get moving on up to the front, we're going to put this seat belt back on here. $12mm socket, and don't forget the cover for it. Now we can move on to the front. So we have these three panels right here that are going on the front. We can start with this one, very simple. You can pull the weather stripping or just kind of tuck it behind it. It's perfectly fine. This one, you will have to pull the weather stripping back a little bit. It's just going to slide back, and the clips go that way. And make sure to get that clip in there as well. Weather stripping can go back on. And the last piece is the side panel. There you go. For this back seat, to get it to latch back up, you just need to push it all the way back, pull the seat up, push it back down, and it aligns this bar and this bracket together, and then just push it on. And that's it.
Alright guys, so this is the end of the first installation video. So we got the amplifier rack the power and ground ran. We also got the interface behind the actual factory stereo for you Sony guys. And now we're going to move on to the speakers and the sound treatment and the blockout plates in the next video. So congratulations, you made it this far, and go ahead and click the next video and let's get started on the next section.